All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. So far, a good turnout. So we're excited to introduce Ryan Crawley, who currently is affiliated with the South Central PGA section and currently serves as the Director of Education for Sportsbox AI. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Sportsbox. For those of you who are not, that's why we invited Ryan to introduce and showcase the platform that I personally have found very useful for a lot of my teachings, whether it be remotely or in person. But it's a really cool product, really cool platform that has come a long way in a short amount of time. And so, Ryan, thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be able to, speak with everybody today and share some information when it comes to the 3D side of things. I'm going to share my screen so that everybody can just see the app, and I'll go through the app and go through a bunch of like teaching examples. As Parker said, I'm the director of education for Sportsbox. I've been teaching for plenty of years now, and I've been using 3D for a good 7 to 8 years, kind of using all different systems from KVest to 4D to Gears a little bit, AMM a little bit. So I've had my time just being able to use all these different 3D systems, and I've always found it to be extremely valuable. And when the opportunity came to me to join the Sportsbox team, I felt like it was kind of a calling. I was like, I gotta jump on board and try to make 3D popular amongst us teachers. Um, when it comes to my background as well, I've taught a lot of lessons. There's a stretch in Chicago where I was doing about 4,000 to 5,000 lessons a year, just teaching sun up to sundown, half-hour lessons, just grinding it out on the lesson tee. Been very fortunate to work with some incredible players. Basically, where it was just my job not to screw them up, since they were so talented, so good, that went on to play at a bunch of really good schools like Vanderbilt, Louisville, and now playing professionally. Um, my big goal today for us and what I really want to share is I want to get rid of kind of some of these notions that 3D has to be complicated, because that's probably one of the biggest pieces of things that I hear from coaches is 3D is just not necessary. A beginner player doesn't need 3D. It's too much information. And that's one of the big things that I've been trying to stress this year to coaches is doesn't have to be too much information. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different examples, just showing simply how we can use 3D. I'll also go through at the end one that's a little bit more in depth on 3D, to kind of show that we can do it all. But mainly, I want to highlight the fact that this can be simple to use. And my big goal, the big takeaway that I want everybody to have here is being able to realize that 3D is a communication tool. It's not so much for us, the coach. I think us coaches, we teach amazing lessons. We do a really good job. We see things pretty accurately for the most part. But when it comes to showing a player and trying to communicate that to a player, through my experience of using 3D and doing last year, I did about 5,000 3D lessons. Hearing from players that, oh, that's what I'm working on with my coach, and I really didn't understand what that was. So I think there's some things when we look at it from 2D that players just have a hard time seeing. And us coaches who look at swings for a living, we have all this, years of examples of drawing on 2D images and seeing things. We see things at a little bit higher lens than our players do. So I'll go through some examples of that too, just to show 2D drawing tools are a little misleading at times. Maybe they're not showing the story as well as it could be, and how 3D can help us kind of communicate that. This is what the Sportsbox app looks like here. So you're going to be able to do both 2D and 3D analysis, which you'll see throughout the presentation here. So the first thing that I want to be able to show, like I said, is 2D doesn't always do it justice. And there's going to be plenty of times where we look at swings and we maybe can see it as a coach that our players just can't. And if I use Dean here, just for an example, with Dean, we were working on him not swaying so much in the backswing. So you're going to see, I'm going to pull up just both of his like before and after, and I'll draw a line for us to be able to see the difference in his swing. And then we'll look at it in 3D to really highlight this. So if I draw a line here on Dean's like trail hip, draw another line on the other screen, and we look, you could see for Dean as he takes that club to the top, he stays, pretty much inside of that purple line. If we look at the new swing here, he stays inside of that purple line. There really doesn't look to be a difference here at all, right? And when we look at this in 3D, you're actually going to notice that there is a difference in where his pelvis is. And so that's where I think a lot of us coaches, we're going to start to realize that some of these lines that we were using maybe weren't the most accurate. It's the best we had at the time. Being able to look at it with these lines, it does help us kind of tell a story. But I think using both 2D and 3D is really beneficial. So you can see there's really looks like no difference. And when we pull it up from a 3D versus 3D comparison, you'll be able to see that a little bit more clearly. And that's really important for our students, because if we have a hard time being able to see it, I mean, they're definitely not going to see it. And they're probably going to have a hard time, seeing their results, seeing the progress that they're making along the way. So you can see here down at the bottom, we have a tracker pelvis sway, just showing how much the pelvis is moving either away from the target or towards the target. At the top of the backswing for Dean, we can see he's at negative 0.1 inches. So he basically didn't move his pelvis at all away from the target. If we look at the after, though, we can see that he's at 1.3 inches. So he's towards the target. He's a little bit closer. And when we looked at that from a 2D lens, we couldn't see it. And there's going to be plenty of teaching examples like that for us. And I'm just going to share a few. I'm going to use Nick, one of my long time students, really good player, plays professionally now. With Nick, he's obviously played golf at a pretty high level for quite a while, and he's always struggled with just sliding a little bit too much on the way down. Loves to hit draws. Sometimes that draw can turn into a hook or can block it out to the right. And we've worked on him not swaying for, it was a good 2-3 years. And there's moments in time where he wouldn't be swaying that much. But regardless, throughout a season, he would always find himself back to swaying a little bit too excessively. And I sent this swing to a ton of coaches, and I was constantly just trying to have coaches, make sure I wasn't missing something, because it was something that we worked on for such a long period of time, and it just wasn't clicking. And how we were going about it, I was trying all sorts of different drills to get him to feel it, and just that change wasn't lasting long enough. And as I would send this swing to a lot of coaches, me personally, I've always thought that, he turned, his pivot was really good. And there was no red flags to me as I was looking at it from a face-on video. And when we started looking at this from a 3D video, there was something that stood out to me. And I'll share that with you here. I'll go split screen with it. And I'm just going to draw some little visuals on the avatar there. So when we look at Nick's golf swing, we're going to see he loves to get this nice big turn. And at the top of his backswing, he likes to get this negative chest bend number. Chest bend can show us if a player has like a reverse pivot, for example, a reverse spine angle is what it can show us. So it'll show how much flexion or extension that the spine has. Chest bend, when it's positive, some coaches might have heard it as like forward bend, is when the chest is tilting a little bit away from the target. John Rahm, really good example of like forward bend. If we have backward bend or a lot of extension or a reverse spine angle, like TPI likes to refer to it, that's when it's going to be a negative chest bend number at the top. So when you look at Nick's golf swing, he has 6 degrees of that negative chest bend. When we look at it from a 2D perspective, myself at least never really was able to see it. I always figured that his chest bend was, probably close to 0, maybe a touch of forward bend just looking at this. But in reality, we can see he has 6 degrees of that backward bend. Now, some players can actually have this like negative chest bend number. Bryson is a great example of this. He gets this negative chest bend number. There's plenty of tour players that are able to play with a little bit of a reverse spine angle. But there's going to be plenty of amateur players when they have a reverse spine angle at the top that their pelvis and their core, their glutes aren't going to be strong enough to prevent that player from sliding. And that's what we noticed for Nick was he just didn't have the strength in order to allow him to not go sliding down into transition. And by the time he hit the golf ball, you could see his lower body moved 7.5 inches towards the target. Just for your reference, the PGA Tour, you're looking for 4 inches. So quite a bit of sway. And really, it was just because of that negative chest bend number, which myself and a bunch of amazing coaches weren't really able to see that negative chest bend number that was causing us, this 2-3 years of problems in his golf swing. If we look at the change that Nick made in his golf swing, you'll be able to see that we just made him turn a little bit less, and that chest bend number at the top is going to improve. So you can see he, now a little less rotated, chest bend negative 0.3. So really good. And really the big difference that you'll see in his swing now is that his pelvis isn't swaying as far forward. And that right there is a good example of, for us coaches, most of the time we're probably going to see things pretty good. But there are going to be plenty of times where, maybe with a better player or maybe with a movement like chest bend, for example, where when you look at it from 2D, it just is tough for us to really understand where it is. That 3D can be really beneficial. I mean, this would have been nice information to have, 2-3 years ago when we've been working on him not swaying so much on the way down. This change that you saw him make, that happened in a 2-month period of just getting a little bit shorter, not swaying as much, and playing some of the best golf of his life because of that little change, that little adjustment that we made in his swing, which without 3D, we probably would have been, just still grinding away at those drills to help him not sway so much excessively on the way down. Probably not making a ton of leeway like we were able to based on finding the real, root cause of the issue. This is a beginner player of mine. This is Deb. Deb has been playing golf for probably 4 or 5 years now. Just really wants to get better at the game. Her big goal was to be able to get a handicap. That way she could go overseas and play in Scotland with her dad. When we look at her swing, if we just look at it from kind of like a 2D versus 2D comparison, once again, we can use the sway numbers and draw a line on the lead or the trail leg for us to be able to see the difference between the two. And for her, you're going to see a little bit more of a difference. It's not like the other one where it looked like there was 0 difference. But with the help of like numbers, we can explain things a little bit more clearly. So we can see at the top of her swing here with the video there on the left, she's still on that line, gets past it a little bit. The one here on the right, she's staying inside of it just a little. If we look at where like her pelvis sway numbers are, look at this pelvis sway is at negative 2.6. What that's showing us is that her pelvis moved 2.6 inches to the right. Doesn't look like it based on that line we drew, right? Even if I make that line a little tighter. You can see it just really doesn't look like it moved almost 3 inches to the right. And this is where it can get a little deceiving when it comes to 2D, because we're looking at the swing from obviously 6 different degrees of freedom. And what you mean by that are like your turn, your side bend, your bend numbers. And then you also have the linear side of things, which is your sway, your lift, and your thrust. Because the pelvis is turning on the way back, there's some times where it appears with Deb that the pelvis is swaying 3 inches to the right, but because of how she's turning, it makes it obviously deceiving. So this is just another example of 2D making it harder on us coaches. And we could explain to her, hey, we want to create some space from that purple line. And she can understand that. But it can become a lot more clear by her just being told like what that number is and where we want to be. Because when you're thinking of, the pelvis sway, for example, it's measured in inches. Everybody here can imagine what like 1 inch is, 2 inches is, 3 inches is. So it can make it easier on us players to understand, oh, this is what my coach is asking of me. So with Deb, what I told her is, on the way back, you're moving roughly 3 inches to the right. I want to keep you closer to 0. And if we look at it, that after video, you'll see she does a really nice job of this. Still plenty of work to be done in her golf swing. It's not perfect, but you can see how she's at that negative 0.1. So it only moved just barely to the right. So a huge improvement. It changed by 3 inches. If I wanted to do a before and after, showing her the 2D versus the 2D doesn't do her justice. If I really wanted to show her the difference, using those sway numbers is going to help us communicate that at a much higher level of, hey, look, it improved by 3 inches. That's an incredible feat that you just had. So just another example how 2D can be a little misleading. And with 3D, it obviously can be a lot easier. Now, I'm very fortunate. I get to help coaches basically learn how to teach with 3D. And I try to make it as simple as possible for everybody. And I'm going to share with you pretty much what I share with every single coach. Because if you guys go and download the Sportsbox app, most people are going to turn on a bunch of numbers and look at the numbers to have them kind of tell us if it's right or if it's wrong. And so I'm going to pull up Frederick here for an example. So like I said, plenty of coaches, they're going to turn on the app. They're going to turn on a bunch of these numbers, and they're going to be looking at a golf swing, and they're going to try to have the numbers tell them where it's right and where it's wrong. And you're going to see the numbers color code. So it is there to help us to be able to see where a player is in range or out of range relative to the PGA or LPGA Tour. The issue with this, though, it's like we're learning to teach for the first time again, because all the years of experience that we have, we're kind of just throwing it out the window. Think about how you would normally assess a golf swing and how you figure out what you want to help that player with. When coaches start using 3D, that's their big issue, is they get rid of all that prior knowledge and they're relying on numbers to tell them what's right and what's wrong, which means you have to have a significant amount of like background and time looking at 3D to have all that kind of memorized, which is just unrealistic for us. So if you're thinking of 3D being a communication tool and not as much a diagnosis, because a lot of us coaches are going to be able to diagnose a golf swing correctly without the help of 3D, that's where I think this be really, really valuable. So when you look at Frederick's golf swing here, and we just get rid of all the numbers, and we're watching Frederick hit shots, we're looking and seeing, okay, what's happening to the golf ball? We're asking him calculated questions to try to understand, what he's dealing with and how we can help him on our lesson tee. And with Frederick, he was hitting some big pushes, hitting it thin. Every now and then would hit one fat, mainly thin. And that would also lead to some pretty big hooks. So based on the ball flight, we have an understanding, okay, club path is getting a little bit too far inside. Base is getting left open at times, but also times he's actually closing that face a little too much, which is causing some issues. Based on that information, I think all of us coaches could find something in his golf swing that maybe we didn't like. And that's where I think 3D is really, really powerful is, okay, what is the issue that you see as the coach? And then what number can I pull up to kind of help communicate that to a student? My background, I like to see a little bit better structure at the top. We can see at the top of Frederick's backswing, he gets a little bit past parallel, doesn't have a ton of width. And I felt like that right there was making him get a little narrow in transition where he was kind of holding on to that lag a little bit too much. And that was causing him to go sliding forward. And as he would go sliding forward, he would start to lean back in order to try to kind of maintain that low point and hit those shots. And there's times he's going to time it up and hit some really good ones. And then there's times where obviously he's going to struggle a little bit. So for me, when I was, helping Frederick in his game, we just worked on being able to show him where his trail elbow, how much it was bending. 'Cause that's a good way of showing kind of width at the top. And we were also showing him his mid-hand sway, basically how much his hands are moving, away from the target or towards the target. So if I just get rid of all these numbers and I go and pull up that trail elbow flexion, and then I also go pull up the mid-hand sway, we can help communicate that to Frederick and exactly where we want him to be. This is the other reason I always suggest for coaches to be the one to kind of guide what you want to help a player with, because you're going to notice that Frederick's numbers are green. So he's in range of what that PGA Tour players do. Just because somebody's in range doesn't mean that that is the right place for them to be. And that's when coaches run into issues as they're looking at all these numbers and they're not relying on their own teaching knowledge to kind of guide where they want to go, is they run into this where they see something, their gut instinct is, oh, that's what's going to be wrong. This person lacks a little bit of width. And then all of a sudden it might show some green numbers and they're like, wait a second, I didn't think that was good, but it's telling me it's okay. When you're the one kind of leading this, it's going to be a lot easier for you to look at that and be like, I know that it's wrong and it's okay. So with Frederick, we can see he's at 69 degrees with his trail elbow. I told him I want him closer to 75. And we can see at the top of his swing, his hands have moved 8 inches to the right or away from the target. I told him, let's try to get that, between 12, 13. I think somewhere around here would be really beneficial for him at the top of his backswing. Help him not go swaying as much on the way down and getting that club kind of stuck inside. And like I said, it's easy for Frederick then to be able to understand, okay, trying not to bend my right elbow as much. And he can see the progress faster. And that's the thing that I think 3D can really help our students, is because they're understanding exactly what we're saying. They can also see the changes that much faster. So if you look at Frederick's swing, basically a week later, you could see the difference. So now his trail elbow's at 70, so a little bit more extended. And then you can really see a difference in that mid-hand sway. Before he was at 8 inches, now he's at 13 inches. So he has a lot more width. And that allowed him to not go swaying as much on the way down. And that also helped him get rid of some of that inconsistency with that ball flight. So if you do decide, and I hope everybody does decide to download the app and start using it, just remember, you're the one that will guide what you want to help the player with. Still go about that normal process of how you break down and look at a golf swing. And once you know this is what I want to help them with, then you can think of which number can I pull up to help me kind of communicate that to a student. I've been really lucky. Been to some amazing events, being able to do these like mini golf lessons for companies And we're at the US Open, did about 1,000 lessons over, the week at being at that US Open. And it's shocking to me how often I hear from a player like, oh, that's what my coach is working on. And now that makes sense. It's like a light bulb goes off in their head. And I've done that now at various events, US Open, the President's Cup, the Byron Nelson, a few like golf shows that we'll do that at. And it's something that I constantly hear. And the one that always stands out to me is a reverse pivot. And so many of our players are going to struggle with a reverse pivot. I know when I have people that come to my lesson tee, that's probably one of the biggest things that I see is that reverse pivot. And when I show it in 3D to these little mini lessons, like I said, it's like a light bulb goes off in their head. And the reason why is because we have these little vertical lines here. And when we look at the golf swing, we can take the player up to the top. And when you see that blue vertical line in front of the yellow, which is the pelvis, that shows a reverse pivot. You could also see that in a number, the sway gap number, basically just the difference between where the chest and pelvis is. When it's a positive number, that means the chest is in front of the pelvis. When it's a negative number, the chest is behind. So anytime you see a positive number at the top of a backswing, that's a sign that that person has a reverse pivot. When you show somebody this in 2D, you can communicate to them that they have a reverse pivot. You can obviously use a pro swing to help them be able to see like what a pivot should look like. But it might not be super clear to them. And that's where I think the avatar can really help us, is to be able to identify it thanks to those vertical lines, and then also thanks to that number. The number to the player doesn't have to have a ton of meaning and value to them. It's mainly going to help them when they see the after, when they see the follow-up of, oh, okay, now that's where I'm at. And it gives us, the teacher, a lot of credibility, because we're not just showing things from a 2D perspective where maybe a student can see the change and maybe they don't really see the change. They can at least see it through the numbers, which helps us a ton. And so if you look at Richard, you can see it's pretty clear from an avatar standpoint that he gets that reverse pivot. If you look at it from 2D, not as clear to see, but then you can see the change in his golf swing. When we look at, this was like a couple weeks later for him working on that. So now at the top, chest is behind the pelvis, and then you can see the sway gap number is now a negative number. With all these examples, Nick's was a little bit more in depth. You can see how simple it is. I'm not pulling up a million numbers. I'm pulling up 1 to 2 numbers just to be able to help communicate and show this to a student so that they understand, oh, this is my issue and this is what we're trying to do to help fix it. If you like teaching with a launch monitor, you'll really like to teach with Sportsbox as well, because we have a feature called a watch list. And a watch list is essentially something that you're working on with a player. So if we would go to that example of Frederick, and we talked about how we were trying to get more width for Frederick at the top, Frederick would be able to record himself and be able to get feedback in the moment thanks to this watch list. So you can see I have a watch list for his mid-hand sway and for that trail elbow flexion. And we could just record and look and see, okay, how was it? How did it stack up to where we wanted him to be? So you could think of that feature kind of as a feature for your players, is like their goal. And when they're in the range and you set the range, it'll be green. So you'll see for him, his mid-hand sway is green. Trail elbow for the range I set, bent a little bit too much. And you can always adjust wherever you'd want that range. So maybe I find out, you know what, 70 degrees at the top looks really good. I could expand that range to whatever you want it to be. So it's kind of a nice, cool feature for us coaches. That way, with our players, they can get some quick feedback without us telling them, yeah, that was good or that was bad. They have some number to kind of rely on, very similar to how you would use a launch monitor, where they hit a shot, look down, and see, if they're working on club path, that club path number. With 3D, just changes happen a lot faster is something that I've noticed with all my students. It gets rid of the fuzziness of me trying to explain things, me trying to show things of, hey, this is what I see in your golf swing, and show it from a 2D lens. And here's where is in 3D. There's no hiding behind, a visual. The numbers are really going to tell the story to that full degree. And I'm trying to find the example here. If you see Ryan, he's going to be at top. There he is. So if we look at like Ryan's swing, once again, another classic like reverse pivot. You can just see the progress that he's made in his golf swing. When he started working with me, he was shooting around 80. Now he's a 1 handicap. So been keeping it in the low 70s for the most part. When Ryan started, and we did all this online, which is really cool, being able to use Sportsbox from an online platform. It's also great in person, obviously, but I feel like from an online standpoint, it is incredible. So when we looked at Ryan's swing, I could draw those vertical lines and we could see, okay, sway gap positive. That shows that this player has that reverse pivot at the top. So with Ryan, we were able to fix that pretty quickly. It took him about 2-3 weeks for it to really change in his golf swing and for him to like never really have to worry about it too much. So you can see at the top of his backswing now, that sway gap number is going to be negative. So his chest is actually going to be behind the pelvis. Like I said, it took about 3 weeks for us to kind of get that every single time. In his golf swing, he's always had a problem with like hitting pulls and slicing it. When we get his path to be a little bit more inside, he starts to release the club a little bit earlier. And you'd see that in his first video that he would start to release it. So we've been gradually changing his golf swing, making these changes over the last, 6 months, let's say. And in that 6 months, he's, been able to lower his handicap by a good 6, 7, I would say, strokes. Nowadays, if you look at Ryan's swing, he does a great job with that pivot, never have to worry about it. So it just shows how quickly it is for him to be able to, work on that. The nice thing is, though, if he ever falls back into that kind of that trap, maybe he starts to rely on that movement again, it's really easy for him to get that feedback and be able to improve that. But nowadays with Ryan, we work on not early extending. So I haven't shown this yet, but we're able to do down the line or face on. And thrust is essentially how much the pelvis is moving toward the ball or away from the ball. That would show early extension in the golf swing, which is something that we see pretty much for all of our players. With Ryan, we'll notice as he took the club up to the top, his pelvis moved roughly 1.3 inches towards the ball. And then on the way down, he's going to have a little bit of that early extension. Now, at impact, he's at 0.1. I prefer to see that be a negative number. I like to see the hip start to get back behind where we set up. But you can see for him, he gets that little bit of early extension. And you can really see how that trail foot starts to come up with him as he does this. And so this, when he starts to get that early extension, he gets a little bit steeper, which we could also measure that. So we could look at the angle here, which is the shaft angle. You have shaft angle at address, shaft angle at impact, and then you also have, in the backswing. So we can see in the downswing, it says shaft down the line angle, DCV. DCV is just fancy for saying downswing club vertical. You can see he's at 33 degrees. If we look at Ryan's swing from yesterday, he just posted this for me, we can see a nice little improvement. And I just started working on early extension with him, gave him a nice little drill to work on, just made that little club underneath the heel here. Classic drill that so many of us coaches do. You can see now he's at 0.6 with the pelvis. Before he was at 1.4. So his pelvis isn't moving towards the ball nearly as much. And we'll be able to see on the way down, his pelvis, 0.6 with the pelvis. Before he was at 1.4. So his pelvis isn't moving towards the ball nearly as much. And we'll be able to see on the way down, his pelvis, 0.6 with the pelvis. Before he was at 1.4. So his pelvis isn't moving towards the ball nearly as much. And we'll be able to see on the way down, no longer early extend. Now he's at that negative number. So his pelvis is pushing away, which is great for him. Like I said, this is something that we worked on literally just last week, did it all online, basically showed him, hey, this is what's happening in your golf swing. You're getting a little bit of early extension. Here's a drill, that golf club underneath the leg. I sent him a little video of that. And, he went to the range and was able to practice and get some feedback. So now we can see the shaft of the golf club is shallowed a little bit more. So it's 3 degrees more shallow than where it was before at club vertical. And we can see he's no longer early extending. So it just shows how valuable this can be. If you do online lessons, or if you're looking to get into online lessons, I definitely suggest Sportsbox. Just because there's so many coaches that do online lessons, not as many of them do 3D lessons. So that's going to obviously be even more valuable, being able to get some measurements and to be able to quantify those changes for a student. So with Ryan, we can already see, in his first practice session, the improvement that he made. Doesn't mean that this is obviously that's it. He's done. He's good to go. He's got to ingrain this for a decent amount of time now. But right away showed Ryan as he was practicing, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? Which that's where this becomes really, really valuable to a player, is because it's like you, the coach, is there on the range with him with the help of the Sportsbox app, because we're the ones that will set, here's your tracker, here's where you want to be. They can then record themselves, hit a shot, and see, okay, am I where my coach wanted me to be or am I not? Which is super helpful. That's helped me in my time, being able to make sure that all my students are practicing effectively and efficiently. And for my students to make those changes, and from an online standpoint, I've just noticed my online lessons that have 3D, it's been a lot faster for them to be able to make those changes that we want to see compared to just relying on 2D video and them going to the range, trying to practice correctly and not exactly knowing if they have the right feedback or not. I'm going to share one more thing with you guys, and this gets into a little bit more in depth about 3D, but I'm going to show the value of just obviously being able to measure and show some more advanced kind of trackers here. So I'm going to pull up a player. His name is Declan. Declan plays Division III golf, so he's a pretty solid player. And over the course of his season, he started to see like he was hitting the golf ball not as far, 5 yards less, and then all of a sudden it turned into 7 yards less, and then all of a sudden he was like 10 to 12 yards short of where he normally was, and it was driving him crazy. He just couldn't understand, like, what is happening in my golf swing that's making me, lose this speed. And so Declan had a little bit of break from school, was able to come up, get a lesson, and we were able to look at some of his numbers. So right now, for those coaches that love seeing graphs, we don't have graphs inside of Sportsbox. It's something that we do have, but there are some pieces of information that we do pull out of graphs. For example, we have this kinematic sequence. And if you think of the graphs that you've seen, the numbers that we're pulling out is the max speed. So the tip of each of those, the graphs that you look at. So you can see pelvis turn speed max, you can see chest turn speed max, lead upper arm, and shaft speed. When it comes to players hitting the golf ball farther, obviously, the faster they move, the higher that these max speeds are, the further the ball is going to go. So when we work with a player that's 65 years old and wants to hit the golf ball further, us comparing it to a tour pro doesn't really do it justice, because of course they're going to be swinging not nearly as fast as
You play Florida?
and us trying to tell them like move faster isn't going to work. It's like telling somebody, here, go dunk a basketball, and if they can't dunk, they're not going to magically be able to just off of effort. So there are some really cool numbers that we can look at, though, in order to see if our player is moving as efficiently in order to create that speed. And that's the other set of numbers here, these what we call them gain factors. If you're familiar with launch monitors, and I think everybody is nowadays, you've heard of smash factor. Basically, that's what we're doing with these gain factors. So there's a core gain factor, shoulder gain factor, and wrist gain factor. Essentially, what it's telling us is how efficiently we move the speed from one segment of the body to the next. So just like smash factor, if you did ball speed divided by club speed, comes out to 1.5. Each of these numbers has a specific number that we're looking for. If you tap on those numbers too, by the way, it'll tell you what that number is. So you don't have to have this memorized as you're looking at it. So if we look at like core gain factor, that magic number is 1.5. If you're looking at shoulder gain factor, magic number we're looking for is 1.4. And then wrist gain is 2.3. We can see Declan's at 1.96. So how we kind of get the math of this is if I did chest turn speed max and I divided it by pelvis turn speed max, that's what that core gain factor is, 1.54. So what that's telling us is Declan does a good job of taking the speed from his pelvis and moving it to his chest. There's not really any issues there that's making him lose out on some of that club head speed. When we move to the next segment and we start to look at the chest turn and the lead upper arm, if we did 795 divided by 628, that's the shoulder gain factor of 1.27. The magic number, like I said, is 1.4. So this right here indicates, okay, there is something making him not move as fast, and he's not taking the speed from the chest and applying that to the lead upper arm as well. And we can also see with the wrist gain, that's going to be the case too. You do shaft speed. So 1.558 divided by 795 comes out to 1.96. Once again, you wanted to be 2.3 there. So quite a bit low. And so again, it's just showing us that he's not able to take then the speed from the lead arm and move that to the shaft speed. Great information. What do I do with it though? That's kind of what I get from coaches. So it can help us identify where in the golf swing this player is losing some of that speed. And so we know based on that his lead upper arm is definitely moving a little bit slower than it should. And we could then look at his golf swing and just try to identify, well, what would be causing that lead upper arm to not move as fast? And when I watched Declan hit some shots just from a 2D, we could see he was releasing the club a little early. He was casting it, which that could definitely make that lead arm not move as fast. That's definitely going to make the shaft speed not move as fast. And that's what was causing him to lose some of that speed. So it can help us looking at these gain factors, be able to see, okay, is there anywhere in this player's swing that's showing me that they're not as efficient and they're just losing out on some low-hanging fruit for distance. In Declan's case, lead upper arm was going a little slow, shaft speed was going a little slow. We identified that he was casting the golf club, which was causing this. Now with Declan, I didn't show him any of these numbers. No point to. He doesn't have to really know, any of that. I can just show him what I want him focused on, which would be that lead wrist angle. And so I was able to show him, hey, at the top of your swing, you can see you have 99 degrees of that lead wrist angle. And right away in the downswing, you're going to see that you're releasing that club a touch early. And that's making you cast. That's slowing down the lead arm, slowing down the shaft speed. And that's why you lost good 10 to 12 yards. And so all I did with Declan, I had him hinge the golf club a little bit more. And I wanted him to feel like he was adding a little bit of flex on the way down. Inside the app, by the way, just so you can see the change from club head speed, we also have club head speed. So if you look at the linear speed, you can see for Declan, club head speed's at 75 miles an hour here. So just for your reference. If we look at Declan's swing, couple swings later, this is literally 2 swings later, we can look at that lead wrist angle. So he hinged it a little bit more. He's now at 88 instead of 99. But the big difference is going to be in transition. He's actually adding a little bit of flex. So it goes from 88. Now he has 80, 4, 83 degrees. And by the time he gets the left arm parallel, you can see he's maintained that hinge a lot better. When we go and look at the club head speed, you're going to see a nice little jump. So he went from 75 to 88. There's all that speed plus a little bit extra that just came back because of what we did with that wrist angle. So if you have players that want to hit the golf ball further, that's where these kinematic sequence numbers are going to be really helpful. We'll be able to pull more information when it comes to kinematic sequence, like the transition order, pretty soon. But for right now, we just have the max speeds and these gain factors. And I really enjoyed using the gain factor. I can look at this and see, okay, where is it in the body that we're losing out? And then what is it that could be causing that? And so it just helps me get to that root cause a little bit faster. I get really excited. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to this stuff. So to me, it's going to be incredible once there's more research that's being done to help us coaches actually know, okay, these are things that are going to cause maybe the pelvis to move slower or maybe the chest to move slower. And that way it's not like, is this a physical issue or is this a technique issue? We can find those technique issues a lot faster. Sometimes, of course, it's going to be, a physical thing. But I'm sure there's plenty of times, I'm sure there's plenty of positions in the golf swing that would make maybe the pelvis a little slower, the chest a little slower. And that's where Sportsbox being able to capture all this data, we're going to be able to come out with some really, really good research from a 3D side of things, just to help us coaches continue to get better. Cool. I'll open it up to questions, or Parker, if you want to jump in with anything, let me know what questions you guys have, and if you want me to run through any other examples or any specific examples too.
Ryan, question that I have is there a metric that you seem to find that you teach off of more than others, or maybe that you find that a certain metric gives a more of an influence to the symptoms that may or may not change throughout a player's swing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the sway numbers are probably the numbers that are used the most, just because you're going to have players that sway off the golf ball a lot. You're going to have people that get a reverse pivot. You're going to have people that move towards the target or slide too much or hang back. So there's so many little things that sway is kind of tied to that I feel like that one is used a good bit. Obviously, arm structure, looking at wrists has always been pretty big for us instructors. So I always suggest using the flex, being able to see elbow flexion, how much the elbows are bending, and also looking at that lead wrist angle. If somebody is hinging the golf club or casting the club, you can show that really easily through the app. So those are probably the most popular. Some of my favorite numbers, something that I look at a ton, is that sway gap. There's some really, really cool things when it comes to this sway gap number. Like I said, it's just the difference between where the chest and pelvis is. So you saw really great for reverse pivot, but there's also some things that it should show us in transition and at impact for like ball flight that a player's trying to hit. I look at golf swings and I try to figure out, well, why is it that a tour pro can, have a certain position and make that work, where maybe one of our amateur players has that same position and just can't make it work? What are they doing different from one another? And sway gap has been really cool to be able to look at and be able to identify, oh, okay, that's really what's changing between players that hit these really good shots and players that hook or hit like slices. Cool. What other questions we got?
I'll throw another.
Ryan, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Jason Prendergast here. The information's awesome. However, as I'm looking at this thing, I mean, hell, it might take me 3 hours to give a golf lesson here as I'm trying to get it figured out. So do you have flow charts, progression charts, that sort of thing that allows this to get dummied down a lot? So if we, for example, on the, if someone has reverse pivoting and we can somewhat see it in with our eye, we measure that, we can see that it is. Is there some form of a flow chart that we get to follow, at least while we're starting to learn all of this technology, so that we're not wasting the students' time as well?
It's a great question. We haven't made a flow chart. It is something that I could kind of whip up for you. What we've been doing is we've been offering a boot camp. So essentially, when you sign up for the Sportsbox app, the biggest thing is we want to help coaches become lifelong, users of the app. And so coaches will go through a 4-week training with myself. It includes our level 1 certification. And then you get these 4 30-minute sessions. You can do them weekly. You could do it all in 1 week, kind of up to you on how you want to make that in your schedule. But you go through the certification, you go through these calls, and we kind of work through exactly what you're saying there of how to use the app, how to dumb it down to the simplest form. One of the biggest thing that I was trying to hopefully influence today is, you're the one that is still determining that this is the issue. And then I help coaches be able to identify, okay, here's the fault. Okay, what numbers can we pull up to kind of educate you on that? And if there's any nuance or things that you got to be aware of with those numbers. For example, if you're using width at the top and you're looking at mid-hand sway, which is how much in inches the hands are moving, away or towards the target from setup. If the person's body, for example, is swaying 4 inches to the right, well, their hands are also going to go 4 inches to the right. So they're going to show this a lot of mid-hand sway. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have enough width. So there's some little nuances that we'll go through, some warnings of hey, if you're showing this, just maybe be aware of, what this is doing in case that can skew kind of the data and what you're trying to show to a player. So yeah, anybody that wants to go through the boot camp, you just sign up for the app. You'll be able to go right through it. It's a really good training session. The coaches that have gone through it have really enjoyed it. Parker went through it. He can also tell you guys all about it. Always had some really good calls with him. Awesome. What other questions?
Right. Something that I found beneficial is the mobility of this and being able to take it on course. How much do you see the data change? Let's say you're doing a full swing on a flat driving range with a perfect lie. How much does that data change on the same full swing with the same club in the middle of the fairway when the ball's above your feet or something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely changes. So that's kind of the downside to 3D over the years, right? 3D has been around for 20, 30 years at this point. And it's always been in an environment that is controlled, right? It's in an indoor environment. It's with all these sensors. So it's not exactly easy to get this data, and you're not really able to capture it from a golf course. That's probably the thing I love about Sportsbox the most, is that I don't have to hook up sensors on anybody. It's literally just recording a video, and then 10 seconds later, you have the 3D data right at your fingertips, and you can bring it out to the golf course. And that's really, really valuable when you're working with players, because on your lesson tee, it's a little bit more comfortable. There's not as much risk involved, right? When you're playing on a golf course, there's consequences. If you hit a bad shot, you're going to have a bad score. So there's a little bit more pressure there. So you definitely see their swings change a little bit. Mainly what you're going to notice is whatever tendency they have, it's going to show a lot more out on the golf course than it does on that lesson tee. When it comes to different lies and everything, there's going to be some movements that have to change in order for us to be able to hit the ball well. like ball below our feet, our chest lift number has to get lower. Our chest has to be able to get lower. We're going to have more side bend in order for us to be able to hit the ball below our feet. So that's kind of cool for us to be able to get some actual research off of that eventually, being able to look at different lies, from the golf course and help us just understand, oh, these are the things that have to happen in order for our players to, hit those shots at a really high level. I saw one come through for a price. So for the annual subscription, it is $800 a year for the annual, or $80 a month. So if you sign up for the year, you're basically saving 2 months. And then all the updates, because we're an app, we come out with updates pretty much on a monthly basis. I'm sure Parker can tell you all about it. Like, the app has been changing nonstop. We're trying to make it better and better. We want this to be like the ultimate coaching tool, not just the 3D software. So all those updates that you'll see, they're free. You're not paying for any updates in the future.
Cool. Doesn't sound like we have any other questions. Ryan, we're right at about an hour, so I'll let you get to your newborn and your busy day ahead of you. But I want to thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for attending. And that was awesome. Can you share your email in the comment section real quick, just in case anybody has any questions for you?
Yeah, of course. If anybody wants to get set up with anything, feel free. You can shoot me an email here, or if you have any questions on 3D, that's my job. I get to help coaches. It's pretty cool to be able to, go through 3D and just talk golf swings all day long.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the information and your time. And thank you to everybody else for being here.